So we are entering a new unit this week. We started out with what I think are the foundational fields of philosophy, metaphysics and epistemology. Because if we don't know what everything is, what its political structures should we try to create and actualize? Well, in this unit, we're going to be looking at social and political philosophy. And so we're going to look at a bunch of different thinkers' views on political theory, the state of Western society, power, and governance. And we're going to start out with a really influential modern philosopher, or at least somebody who has contributed to the way that we think about political theory nowadays. This is Thomas Hobbes, English philosopher. I even brought my Calvin and Hobbes sweater. I intended on wearing this, and I would if I wasn't sweating profusely right now. But y'all can enjoy that and maybe find your own at Goodwill if you're lucky, like I am. In any case, I think it might be helpful to give you some historical context so that you might understand why Hobbes is going to be arguing what he does in this book. I asked you to read one chapter from his master class on political philosophy, Leviathan. Now, Thomas Hobbes was born in the 1600s. He was actually born early, and it would not be crazy to say that being born around 7 months was due to his mother witnessing a very scary, traumatic event, namely the Spanish Armada sailing up to the coast of England. Hobbes was born on this day, on Good Friday, and it is said that this sight induced his mom into labor. And so Hobbes was born during a tumultuous time, a warring time. And during his life, he not only saw the Spanish-English War, but also the English Civil War, one of the most terrible and violent wars in English history. Later in his life, when reflecting on the circumstances of his birth, he said that, unbeknownst to her, my mother gave birth to twins that day, myself and fear. And fear is going to play a central role in Hobbes' philosophy. As we'll see, he's going to give us a particular conception of human nature, and therefore what a society or what the state humans would be in if there wasn't a government, laws, or rules keeping people in line. And this is going to be based on the passions, on feeling. Hobbes was a man of his day, and so his philosophy and his conception of human nature is rather mechanistic, if we would like to use that metaphysical language. Recall what we mean by that. The universe operates according to certain laws or processes that follow these rules. Hobbes thinks that the human being works in much the same way. Just as atoms and particles and fields operate according to certain physical laws, the human body and the human mind operates according to certain mechanistic laws as well. Thus, what is going to be central for Hobbes is his insistence that humans are beings that are pushed and pulled by passion and feeling. He is a very sensuous conception of human nature. And though he's going to say that human beings have reason and rationality, just as Plato said, Descartes, and some of the other thinkers we've looked at also said, he's going to say fundamentally we are motivated by passion and feeling, not reason at the end of the day. And this is going to naturally inform the philosophy that we're going to be looking at today and what he discusses in this book, Leviathan. To give you some more information, I've written some key concepts on the board that Hobbes helped pioneer and conceptions that still undergird the way that we think about political philosophy today. The first is the state of nature. The state of nature is supposed to represent that hypothetical scenario that humans are in society bereft of any government, laws, or law enforcement, keeping people in line and maintaining order. We're going to start off this unit by looking at two thinkers who have oppositional views about what humans are going to be like and feel in this state, as well as how society and government is formed and whether or not it is good for us. Another important view that Hobbes helped pioneer was social contract theory. And this is the view that people's moral and political obligations are based on an agreement that they come to, which structures the society in which they live. This was kind of a new idea because it had something important to say about the legitimacy and the authority of government. According to the ancient political vision and the political theory that undergirded Europe during this time, there was this idea that the sovereign or the monarch or the ruler got their authority and legitimacy from above them in some way. From God, for example, in this idea in the divine right of kings. What gives the monarch the authority to rule? Where do they get their power from? Well, it's given to them from God, from the top down. Hobbes and other political theorists around this time, such as Locke and Mill, are going to argue something different. They're going to put forth what we can call a modern political vision, which stipulates no, authority and legitimacy does not come from the top down, from some other realm or divine being, but rather it is constituted from the bottom up. The ruler achieves the authority and legitimacy that they have from the consent of the governed. So it is the people in society that give the legitimacy and the authority to the ruler that is governing on behalf of them. It doesn't come from the top down. The reason that we're talking about this idea is because it is central to how we view politics in the West and the United States more specifically. Think of the view classical liberalism, which undergirds our political theory in the US, for example. The founding fathers stipulate man has certain unalienable rights that ought not to be infringed. Rights that they have in virtue of being human. And they define the role and purpose of the government as ruling on behalf of the people, for the people. You could say this is supposed to be a role of service, not just a role of dominating power and imposing will on others. So these ideas of individual rights, of authority and legitimacy coming from the bottom up, this idea that government should be organized to work in the service of the people, for the people, towards the protection of these rights, are all modern formulations, relatively new in human history, although they deeply inform how we think about this stuff in the US today and the founding of our nation. So hopefully that gives you some good information, a good frame with which to orient yourself in the discussion that we're going to have today and what Hobbes is trying to get at. I asked you to read chapter 13 of his book, Leviathan. And what this is a reference to is that sea monster that is mentioned in the Bible. This sea monster that is swimming through the deep that we cannot help but look at in awe because of its amazing, overwhelming power. Hobbes uses this symbol in order to represent the commonwealth or the state. Much like a giant sea monster, in which the Bible says God created and tamed, the commonwealth or the government is also something that has incredible power, something that we are and should be fearful of because of its monopoly on force and violence. But if we can tame it, if we can become friends with it, we can use it to terrifying effect, not only in the protection of ourselves and our fellow people, but also in getting things done. And so what Hobbes is going to do in this book is, in the first half, he's going to offer a theory of human nature, and then he's going to offer a theory on how government comes to be, what it should be like, and what its role and purpose is. One way that you could conceive of Hobbes is, like the Buddha, you could say he is something of a physician. What he's trying to do in this book is diagnose the problems that arise from human existence and prescribe some sort of solution to those things. So, does anybody have any questions so far? Excellent. Then we're going to continue on. I'm going to start off by giving you some general notes on this piece, and then we're going to talk about, well, what exactly is Hobbes arguing for here? And hopefully we can have a little discussion on whether or not you think he is right. Hobbes, I think, does a really great job in this book giving a bunch of arguments for his views and proposing what I think is a rather convincing and realistic view of human nature and the role of government in our lives. In this piece, Hobbes' goal is to explain what human nature is like, what the state of nature would be like for humans, and therefore what the role of government is and should be in human life. And keep in the back of your minds as we go through this, the central role that feeling and passion plays in your life and in human life generally. More specifically, desires and feelings and fear. I might abbreviate some things like that. Hopefully y'all can make sense of it. Now, I told you he starts off this book by offering a particular view of human nature. A view that we could say is in opposition to Plato. One of the implications we get from Plato's philosophy in his book, The Republic, from which we read the allegory of the cave, is that if we can get education right, if we could set up society right and make it so that people rule themselves according to reason and subject their desires and their spirit and their appetites to their rational capacity, people can become virtuous and wise. And potentially we could establish some kind of social utopia. If we get everybody on the same page, we educate them and we train them right. And all of this is guided by reason and wisdom. Thus, you could say on Plato's view, he conceives of the human being as a rational animal. An animal with reason, that should be guided by reason, that should employ their reason. And that humans have the capacity to do this. They have the capacity to live their lives according to reason, and that would be good. Hobbes does not fully accept this view. While he's going to say that yes, humans have reason, it plays a much less central role in his understanding of human nature than it does in Plato's view. For Hobbes, what it means to have reason is basically to be able to calculate things. You can weigh different options. You can discover or unveil which desires are more strongly actualized within you. But it's not something that really takes precedence in how we think and act in human life. Fundamentally, what we are motivated by, Hobbes thinks, is our feelings, our passions, our desires. And so though we possess reason, that is what motivates most, if not all, of what we do. Now, what else are humans like? Well, on Hobbes' view, to oversimplify, we can say that humans are kind of like these biological machines that operate according to certain materialistic laws, and they're moved by passion, by feeling. What is a part of that? Well, a part of that is human beings are self-interested. They look out for themselves. They try to achieve power and pleasure for themselves. This is how human beings act. And I think you'll realize this if you just reflect on your own life, right? We're not always motivated to do what we do just because, like Kant thinks, oh, it's the right thing to do and that's what I need to do. No, a lot of times we're motivated out of self-interest, out of looking out for number one, right? Doing what's going to be good for me, what's going to further my goals. Now, what is unfortunate about human beings is that we have all of these physical and psychological needs. We have needs for food and water, shelter and clothing. We can't survive without these things. We have certain psychological needs for security, for happiness, for pleasure, for belonging and community. All of that wouldn't be so bad if we were able to meet these needs on our own, but we cannot. We need help from others in order to satisfy our physical and psychological needs. And so what this is going to imply is that in order to get all of our needs met, we kind of have to live in community with others or have relationships with other people. Nevertheless, although there are differences between us, we are more similar than we are different. Think about it. Some of you in this room are faster than others, stronger than others, more intelligent than others. But we all have the capacity to reason and reflect. We're all motivated by feeling. Given enough time and planning and thought, any one of you could kill anybody else in this room if you really wanted to. You have the capacity to lay traps, make plans, deceive, manipulate, and so on. And so while there might be some natural or genetic inequalities among us, roughly Hobbes is going to say we possess the same physical and psychological capacities. For Hobbes, all of this is going to lead to, well, an unfortunate conclusion. Reflect on what he is saying here. Human beings are self-interested. They're motivated by passion. They possess reason, they need help from others to satisfy their needs, and they possess roughly the same physical and psychological capacities. Hobbes is going to say when you gather all of this stuff up, this implies something. These facts of human nature imply certain things about what the state of nature is going to be like for us, what government should be like, and therefore what society is going to be like. And he talks about this on the 3rd and 4th pages of this very small chapter. It is in this chapter 13 where he describes how human societies arise and the kind of state that we are in before government or sovereign is set up. As you'll see, he has a realistic, or you might even say pessimistic view on what life would be like this, like for us if we were in the state of nature. And I'm going to abbreviate that like so. He says on pages 3 and 4, "Hereby it is manifest that during the time men live without a common power to keep them all in awe, they are in that condition which is called war. And such a war as is of every man against every man. For war consisteth not in battle only, or in the act of fighting, but in a tract of time, wherein the will to contend by battle is sufficiently known. And therefore the notion of time is to be considered in the nature of war, as it is in the nature of weather. For as the nature of foul weather lieth not in a shower or two of rain, but in an inclination thereto of many days together, so the nature of war consisteth not in actual fighting, but in the known disposition thereto. During all the time there is no assurance to the contrary. All other time we may call peace. Whatsoever therefore is consequent to a time of war, where every man is enemy to every man, the same consequent to the time wherein men live without other security than what their own strength and their own invention shall furnish them withal. In such condition there is no place for industry, because the fruit thereof is uncertain, and consequently no culture of the earth, no navigation, nor use of the commodities that may be imported by sea, no commodious building, no instruments of moving and removing such things as require much force, no knowledge of the face of the earth, no account of time, no arts, no letters, no society, and which is worst of all, continual fear and danger of violent death. And the life of man in such a state is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short." So in the state of nature, what would things be like for us? Terrible. We would be living insecure, fearful lives. Imagine the situation. We're all living in the woods. There's no government, there's no laws, there's no law enforcement. Are you going to be happy and secure? Or are you going to be wondering whether or not somebody's going to come over that hill and kill you, rape your family, and take your stuff? Reflect on your own experience now. Do you trust others in society? And here we do have law enforcement. We have government and laws. There is some order that is maintained. In the state of nature, there is no such thing. And consequently, people being self-interested and rational, they're going to live rather isolated, solitary lives. They're going to be focused on acquiring the necessities for survival. Cooperation, large-scale cooperation, is not going to be possible, and it's not going to be actual. So in the state of nature, Hobbes hypothesizes there would be no industry, no manufacturing, no culture, no importing or exporting, no trade with other nations. There isn't a nation to trade with. No arts. He says no letters, society, philosophy, but, quote, continual fear and danger of violent death. Thus, without government or law enforcement keeping people in line, people would live insecure, fearful, chaotic, violent lives. They would be concerned with where they're getting their next meal from. They would not trust others. They would not be able to cooperate with others. Perhaps have faith in the goodness of human nature at all. Because what are you going to do, or what are other people going to do in the state of nature if there isn't anybody enforcing the rules? If there aren't any rules, what is going to happen? Because human beings are rational, they will figure out quickly that resorting to violence to protect themselves and their families and to achieve their own ends is the smart thing to do. There's no government, no laws, and you know there is a group living on the other side of the hill. What's the smart thing to do? Kill them before they kill you. You have no assurances that they're going to play nice, that they're going to look out for you, that they're going to do anything to help you. No, you can count on them being self-interested and rational, so they're probably thinking the same thing. Imagine in our society if the government, if the police, if the laws, all of these institutions just dissolved today. Would we all get together and be happy and establish the utopia? Or would it be the fucking purge? What do you think?
I mean, I think in our society the problem is that government creates pressure, which creates this idea of scarcity, and that will uses scarcity creates crisis, scapegoating. So I think without government entirely, it would just be human nature. I think thinking rationally, it would be to live in a community, because if you're just you and your family, then there's a lot of work you would have to do to survive. So if you
sure.
other families as well and work together, it's even easier to survive. So it's to help you is to help me, to help me is to help you. So I think that would be the rational thought there. But I think because of the pressure of government already in us, I think it would be encouraged. But if we never had that pressure, I don't think human nature would.
Okay, so given the way we are now, you think, yes, if everything dissolved, it would be violent chaos, insecurity, and fear. This is what Hobbes thinks because of his conception of human nature. Human beings are self-interested and motivated by passion and feeling. We are not always rational. And in fact, maybe the majority of the time, we're not rational at all. So he thinks that the state of nature would be a state of perpetual war and conflict. People would be disposed to violence. They would engage in violent acts. They would kill and steal. In the state of nature, it would be every man for himself. So rational people would use violence to achieve their ends.
I think like in today's world we're moving further away from like actually trusting our government though. Like I would argue that like our parents' generation had a lot more trust that our government had good intentions with a lot of people. And like the law and everything, like people don't trust police officers the way they used to years ago because we're seeing that a lot of people in law enforcement are corrupt, or I guess the system itself is corrupt a lot of times. So like I feel like we're already moving towards a society where it is every man for himself, because think about people who argue gun rights so hard, it's literally because they want to be able to protect themselves in case of an emergency. Like your initial thought isn't to like always call the police nowadays like it used to be. I think a lot of times we handle business on our own rather than like calling for help.
Okay, so what do you think our society would turn into if all of that stuff dissolved today in class?
I just think it depends on like a lot of things. So like it depends on the area you live in. Depends on.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like, because there's already states that have less police enforcement than others do, and like we see differences in state laws with that all the time. Like crime in certain areas that are heavily enforced, like police enforced, and ones that aren't. So I feel like some places would be really chaotic, but I think other places would be fine without, because we already have that. Like
Maybe.
You know what I mean? Like certain cities that are heavily police enforced versus ones that aren't.
What do you think it would be like in Pittsburgh? In this city?
I feel like it would be pretty chaotic. But at the same time, I see police officers who don't do shit every day on the, like
Sure.
literally I'm like watching them and they're like, there's something so much more important going on right down the street, and they're worried about a traffic wall. Like it's like,
Sure.
you have people overdosing on your streets. Like why is something not happening here? You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think in any part of society would be an immediate opportunist dream to be able to kill people and commit crimes.
Sure.
I think society as a whole would eventually realize that they need other people to survive and eventually calm down, but by that point the opportunists would have died from trying to kill other people. Because I think like preppers really concentrate on today is guns, and they have no sense of concentration on community and the fact that humanity as a whole needs community to survive, because the whole point of rugged individualism was only conceptualized in the Western society in the past 100 years, was just because the United States wanted to be like, we're stronger, we're more independent, and everyone can fight for themselves. But before then, even in the United States, we relied too heavily on community to, survive. So I think that there'd be opportunities at first. I mean, you can even look now, like, the city doesn't have as many police as it used to. It has more crime than it used to. And even now, the city just announced that, like, police won't be responding to calls unless it's an immediate emergency.
Okay.
And they determine what's an immediate emergency. Otherwise, you can just do an online reporting system. So if a crime already happened to you and you call the police, nothing's going to happen. You just have to report it online. So, yeah, when the police aren't having presence in place, there's going to be more crime. But as a whole, as the collapse of society, I think people would eventually, after the opportunity to already, commit crimes, I think as a whole society would eventually just band together.
I think Hobbes is going to have a similar idea. In this chapter, he says, if you don't believe me, just reflect on your own feelings and experiences. A lot of you live in the dorms? Do you lock your door at night? Do you even have something in your room that you lock in your locked dorm that you keep your keepsakes in? When you walk down the street at night, do you feel safe and secure? Would you trust the average person that you meet out there to do the right thing and to help you out if you needed it? Reflect on your own life experience, and Hobbes is trying to say, look, you already live a partly insecure life now. You live a partly fearful life now. You do not trust other people. You would not trust the average person with anything important. If those are the thoughts and feelings that you have in a society in which there is a common power holding everyone in awe, imagine what it would be like if all that stuff dissolved. He says, people lock their homes. People lock their chests in their homes. They bring weapons with them on journeys. All of this stuff testifies to that experience that you have that society is scary. Even though there are laws, even though there are police. Thus, he thinks we know the state of nature is going to be like this based on our own experiences in society today. And all of this is going to fall out of Hobbes' conception of human nature. Hobbes does not think humans are naturally evil. He does not hold that view. He doesn't think people are naturally evil. He thinks that people are naturally self-interested. And they are moved by feeling, emotion. You know the kinds of things that people get up to when they are motivated strongly by fear or rage. Thus, this would not be a good situation for us. This is not something that we should seek. Instead, he thinks, realizing this, reflecting on our own experiences, this is what leads humans to construct a social contract and set up a government or a state.
I feel like in a way, like this is also a good thing though, because think about if there was no law. I mean, this has happened before, but like, say there's one bad self-interested person on a plane and they're trying to hijack it, and there's 5 also self-interested good people on the plane who take down the bad person because they don't want to die, but in the midst of that, they're helping all the other people on the plane. Like, you know what I mean? Although you're not necessarily doing it for the good of everyone, it's still helping the good of everyone because you want to save your own life.
Sure. Does that happen a lot?
I mean, that's happened before.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like.
And so the question is, why is that? Is that because, people are conditioned into having the right values because of the social contract?
I think that people just, in the end of the day, want to save their own life. But you know what I mean?
So you agree with Hobbes. But you're saying sometimes that manifests in helping others out.
Ways, yeah.
Okay.
Like, that's not their main priority. I feel like when you're fighting someone off like that, like, I don't think your first thought is everyone else. Your first thought is yourself most of the time, even if people don't want to admit it. But
Hobbes would agree with that, and he might use some contemporary examples to help motivate the idea that the state of nature would be as chaotic and violent as he thinks it is. Such as, if you see somebody bleeding on the street, what are the odds that you're going to be the Good Samaritan to help them? There have been studies that have been done on this, And a lot of times people just continue walking. Why? In some places, trying to be the Good Samaritan can get you sued. And so looking out for their own self-interest, I'm not going to put my hands in that business. I got to look out for myself. And although I would agree that it does lead to some good things sometimes, I think a lot of y'all would agree that self-interest results in a lot of inequality and oppression and harm. If you look at, for example, the way that our economy is organized, which incentivizes psychopathic behavior and greed and avarice. We'll talk about this more when we look at our next thinker. But if you concede that human beings are self-interested, fundamentally motivated by passion, Hobbes thinks you will come to the same conclusion that I do. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, I feel like even all of those things that you just listed isn't necessarily rooted in human natures.
Okay.
In government.
So you don't think humans are naturally self-interested?
I don't think. No, I think if everything was sort of. I think with any scarcity, rationale becomes skewed, but I think
Self-serving.
yeah, because it's there's oppression, and because of that there's scarcity. I think in the city, if there's no government, things would get pretty scary, but that's just because there's so much scarcity and people are at such high demands of needs to survive.
Sure.
In survival mode, they're not thinking rational. But I think in their nature, if they weren't put in that situation, I don't think they would just be robbing and murdering everyone.
Okay. I think you're really going to like Rousseau then, that we're going to look at next class. Yeah.
I don't think of it last. I feel like part of nature is wanting to control your surrounding environments, and I feel like somebody would try to reinstate it. Somebody would try to be in power no matter what happens. There's always going to be someone who wants power.
Sure.
Wants control of other people, wants people in line, and whether it's good or bad, there's always going to be someone fighting for that because it's human nature to want to be able to control your environment and control things. I'm not saying it's greed or whatever, but self-interest. You want things to go your way.
Yeah.
And all the chaos, people will just fall under whoever is loudest.
Yeah, well, what you're echoing there is, it sounds like a Nietzschean view, or a view that is implied by thinkers like Foucault and others who think that the cultivation and exercising of power is what lies at the bottom of all of this. Organisms want to cultivate and exercise their power, impose their will on the surrounding environment. Yeah.
And I feel like even if you get rid of laws and government, people still fear God way more than a lot of government and law. People, even though it's not for the right reason, they are self-interested, a lot of religious people. They do good because they want to get to heaven, because they want to, abide by God's rules or laws. In my opinion, people a lot of times will do missions work because they want to look good and they want to feel good, and it is self-interested, but it's almost like religion is its own law. And even if you get rid of these governmental laws, I think a lot of people would fear going to hell still.
Perhaps especially in the U.S.
Right, yeah. Especially in the Western world. People, I think, would be held back from committing crime still by the fear of hell, because religion is that powerful. People fear death more than anything, I think, because we are self-interested. Even though it's for the bad reason, deep down morally it's not really right, but we cover it up by being I'm religious, and you know what I mean?
Yeah. That's actually a great segue into our next point. So Hobbes thinks that we're self-interested, and we do have a lot of fear. We fear our own death. We want to be respected by others. We want power. We want to protect ourselves in what we have. And so once humans take stock of their situation, and they take stock of how insecure and terrifying the state of nature is, that compels them to do something tremendous. Fearing the state of nature, fearing our deaths, not wanting to live in a situation in which we cannot trust anybody, we cannot cooperate. What do? Well, he says, with all that in mind, what humans do is they set up a social contract with each other. That is, they form communities. They agree to set aside all of their natural liberties, to do whatever they want, in order to live according to certain rules and laws. Why? So that can establish some semblance of security and protection, so that they are not overcome by fear, so that they can cooperate and get things done. And this is how Hobbes thinks the state or the government is formed. To protect ourselves and our things, we establish a social contract with others to protect us and secure our liberties and property. For Hobbes, this is a choice between bad and worse. This is not perfect. This does not solve all of our problems, but it does provide some semblance of security for us. The state of nature is worse. Setting up a government, living together according to rules and laws, not perfect, but is better. To do that, Hobbes says that a sovereign needs to be set up. What is the sovereign? Well, just somebody who is given the power and the authority to rule and govern on our behalf, to enforce the rules, to maintain order, to keep other people in line. Again, because we don't want to live this chaotic, violent, insecure life. So, we willingly give up some of our freedoms to do things to establish some peace and security in our lives. A sovereign, if you will, which you could just define as a ruling group or person. Now, where Hobbes perhaps gets a little radical in his thinking is he thinks that the state of nature is so bad that any sovereign is better than none. Think about what that implies. Would any of you want to live in the former Soviet Union under their socialistic state? Would any of you want to live in China right now with their social credit system? Most people would say no, but Hobbes would say, if your choice is between that or the state of nature, you better go with the first option so you don't get killed tomorrow and so that all your crap isn't taken away from you. Thus, what he kind of implies is even living under a tyrannical dictator is going to be preferable than living in the state of nature. So any sovereign is better than none. And there are two primary ways that a sovereign might come into power. Through election, the people get together and they elect the sovereign into power. They say, okay, we're choosing you. You're going to rule. You're going to enforce the laws and maintain order. Or through acquisition, which involves a person or a group coming in and just taking power for themselves, usually through violence and death. Now, obviously, while one of those is more preferable than the other, what he's just describing here is the mechanics of how a sovereign gets appointed. But ultimately, this formation of a social contract this appointing of a sovereign, the establishment of law and government. Hobbes thinks these are awesome things, or at least a lot better than the alternative. Why? Well, these things allow us to live among one another and cooperate together towards shared goals. Look at all of the stuff that we have. We have rights in this country. We can vote. We have a great deal of freedom and autonomy to choose the life path that we want. We can choose the career that we want to do. We get to choose the people we associate with. We have cars and shopping malls and laptops and Starbucks, tattoos and glasses, philosophy, art, and music. This stuff would not be possible without cooperation, without us working together. And so Hobbes is going to say, in the state of nature, you would have none of that. You wouldn't be able to construct any of that. But the formation of this social contract, the appointing of a sovereign, the establishment of laws and government, they allow us to work together to create technology, art, media, manufacturing, trade, all of that stuff. Consequently, although Hobbes has a realistic or pessimistic conception of the human nature and the state of nature, you might say that he has an optimistic view on the development of society throughout the centuries. Why? It's allowed us to live in ways that we never imagined. Having these pieces of technology in our pockets that give us basically the entire domain of human knowledge at our fingertips. We can fly to Europe in vacation. We can watch anime on our laptops. Listen to Bach and Beethoven. Thus, all of this stuff allows us to produce culture, art, technology. And it gives us a measure of protection, freedom, and happiness that we would not be able to achieve. So the consequences of this could be enumerated until the end of time, the positive consequences. The alternative is much worse. Hobbes is not going to say that our society is perfect, that it's doing everything right, that it is the best thing imaginable. But to support the formation of these things, the social contract, government, law, whatever, he's going to take stock of the real advantages that these systems provide. Compared to the state of nature, he is going to say, living in society with a sovereign, with all of this stuff, people are happier, they're more secure, better off in general, they have rights that the government is supposed to defend and protect and allow opportunities for the exercise thereof. We can place demands on the government. We have somebody or something that is doing all of this protection and enforcement work on our behalf. We don't have to worry about that. And we can now cooperate on all of the things I just mentioned. It is because of this, our exit from the state of nature the giving up of our natural liberty, the formation of a social contract, that we can watch Jujutsu Kaisen, that we can play Minecraft on our laptops, that we can take philosophy classes, that we can build a business and make money and set our families up for success. All of that has been made possible. And it would not be possible for us living in the state of nature, he thinks. So, Hobbes ultimately thinks that this has been a good thing. The formation of society and government has been a good thing for humans historically. All things considered. Yes, there have been wars and violence. Yes, there has been inequality and oppression. But that is way better than the alternative, according to his view. This is the story that Hobbes provides for how society and government originated. Its impacts on human life, and how it provides solutions to the problems of insecurity and chaos and uncertainty that face us. Do y'all think he gets something right? What do you think of his view?
I mean, I agree that some level of conformity is like required for like collective good, but like I think what it's missing is like I feel like this standard is like only like really privileged people like that have benefited from the system. I think it's forgetting people that haven't, like, that are, like, brutalized by the justice system or are homeless and have been forgotten by the system entirely. So, I don't know, I think it's missing some things, but I guess there's some things about it that I agree with.
Okay. Let me play devil's advocate. Definitely there's inequality, right? People who have fallen through the cracks, they're not getting what they need. Is that better or worse than living in the woods alone? What do you think?
I mean, I think I would say if you can live in the woods alone and keep yourself alive, at least you're not being like, I don't know, like.
I would not be able to survive in the woods alone. I don't have those skills. I concede. Like, look, for a lot of people, the system does not seem to help them that much. Perhaps it makes their lives worse. But Hobbes is going to say, if you look at the big picture, yes, their lives are a lot worse than some other people's lives, but it's much better than the alternative. They would have died in the forest 2 decades ago, because there would be scarcity of resources and competition over resources and death. So he's like, look, this is an imperfect solution to our problems, but it's a lot better. Do you agree with the general sentiment, or are you still a little skeptical?
I mean, like I said, I do think ultimately, like, the perfect society would be a collective society, and that requires some level of conformity, but I think, like, where it goes wrong is, like, when that conformity requires, like, sacrifice of your own needs, which, like, I guess what I'm saying is I don't think needs to be. Like, I think if you're looking out for yourself truly, you would be looking out for everyone else as well. Because if everyone else is doing okay, then you can be okay as well.
Okay. Yeah, no doubt our system could be improved and people could be doing better, right? And being kinder and more selfless.
Also, like, I think we don't keep in mind that these same people who are in our government are also humans, which he says are self-will, like they're self-driven. So like, I feel like he's not acknowledging that people that are higher up can be very corrupt people who are very ill-intended. And I feel like, especially nowadays, we're seeing a lot of that come to light. Like, whereas before, like when I said people trusted our law and government a lot more than they do now, is because like a lot of people are being exposed for being bad people who have power, like,
and who have misused it.
right.
And they're, yeah.
And like, you're also, like, I feel like his point also kind of like doesn't shed light on like abuse of power too, because when you do give self-driven humans that much power, people just like, it's human nature to abuse your power once you have it. Like, it's just like, it happens all the time without people even realizing they're doing it sometimes. And I think that's what leads to corrupt systems that a lot of people are harmed by.
Yeah. I think, although he doesn't state it explicitly here, I think he would concede that. I think he would say, yes. Based on my experiences, if you think of the wars and the conflicts that he saw, he would say, yes, there are abuses of power. There is corruption. It's just, we have a choice between bad, which is what we have, or worse, living in the state of nature. And what we have now is not as bad. So, you might even say his view is a little modest. I don't know. Although if you don't agree with his conception of human nature, you might not agree on the necessity of a social contract, the necessity of a government, and the good things that it has done for us. If you think along the same lines of Rousseau, who we're going to look at on Wednesday, you might think that government, law, society, and the institution of private property have caused humans to go downhill ever since they began forming communities. In any case, this is the view that he provides. He's got an analysis of human nature. He's got a story about how government is formed. And he thinks that by and large, this has been great for us. Imperfect, but much better than the alternative. As we'll see, the thinkers that we're going to look at in the rest of this unit aren't going to agree with all of that. And so we're going to look at Rousseau, who provides oppositional views on almost everything that Hobbes here says. So, does anybody have any final questions, comments, or concerns? Does his view make sense? You feel like you grasp it? Okay, cool. Well, that is where I will end it for today.